Welcome to Left, East to West with me, Tom Parkin.
And me, Nikki Hill. It's August now, but July was a swirl of politics again across the country. And of course, every time Trump talks about Canada, we get another period of chaos. Well, we can definitely guarantee we're heading into a busy fall again. Hopefully some of that drama and intrigue will calm down a bit, partly because we're going to take a break from the show next week. July also gave us wildfires across the country, and Trump even finding a way to go after us on that piece as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about shifting public polling on climate-related opinion, especially related to extreme weather we've all been experiencing in different ways in many communities. But first, our guest interview is Jared Walker from Canadians for Tax Fairness coming up, and we're going to jump into this week below the fold, tracking a couple of important news stories that maybe didn't make national headlines.
Nikki, I read a story last week about two firefighters killed in Crete by the wildfire that they were fighting, and we saw this huge, this intense heat in Europe through June, and then big wildfires and mass evacuations in Spain and France in July. Wildfires in northern Ontario, now throughout the Pacific Forest, and you're looking at some polling suggesting people are very aware and increasingly concerned.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. We do see sort of this seasonal bump when I often look at climate polls as well to see public opinion. But I think what's coming out right now is a little bit more than a bump and a heightened concern. So I do think it's, probably one of the most interesting political trends to watch in Canada is this reemergence of climate change as a top public concern. And we're going to talk a little bit about how it might create some challenges for Prime Minister Mark Carney. But I think, I certainly observe doing public policy in the last few years and through election cycles. It shows that I think rightfully so, Canadians are really focused, of course, on inflation, affordability, and then, of course, in the last couple of years, economic threats from the United States. But what that means to affordability and their families and their jobs for the most part. So we're not seeing those issues, and I can't imagine we're going to see those issues fall away from top-ranking public concern. And climate didn't disappear. It just sort of consistently moved down the list of priorities for Canadians as they were grappling with other issues that were in that daily impact, I think. So I think that's changing a bit. There's a new Angus Reid Institute poll just out that found that the number of Canadians who identify climate change as a top national issue has jumped from 14% in March, so just March, to 21% today. So it's a 50% increase in just 4 months, which I think is not a bump. That is something to watch here.
Yeah, that's definitely not just margin of error stuff.
Yeah, and I do think it's not unusual to, especially in areas that maybe are experiencing severe wildfire season for the first time. So, we do see it in BC in particular, where we have wildfire season, starting pretty early every year, where climate does come up a little bit in public opinion polling, and then it does drop off. But this actually looks more like a shift. And particularly, I think, as we are seeing, as you touched on to intro, Tom, Europe and other jurisdictions with this extreme weather and wildfires as well, and what impact that has, I think, on people's perception about climate change. So the interesting trend here to watch too is that the poll found that 15% of people who voted for Liberal in 2025 in the federal election now say they'd actually support the NDP. And among those Liberal to NDP switchers, climate change is twice as likely to be a top concern compared to Liberals who still are in that Carney tent. And so I think that matters because, Mark Carney came into office. He was promising a really different approach to climate policy than Justin Trudeau. I do think a lot of people who are climate interested sort of parked or loaned their votes to Carney, not having a sense about how different that approach to climate policy may be. Now we see a prime minister who's openly arguing that the previous Liberal government's climate plan was too expensive and too divisive. So he's looking at a pretty entire shift here on climate policy. And he's drawing into those affordability pressures and political polarization. And I think, all politicians right now, and we've talked a lot about the major projects plan and how provinces are tackling it as well. They see that affordability and jobs priority coming up as much as we do out here and what the public is pointing them to. But, there has been a real abandonment of some of the major pillars of the Trudeau era framework. So things like the consumer carbon tax, the oil and gas emissions cap, and I think that will likely continue, even though Carney's also acknowledging that emissions are going to be higher in the near future as a result of some of these policy changes he's making. And I think in the last, few months, we are really seeing where that expanding LNG exports focus is coming in, pursuing that a pipeline to Canada's west coast. One point I do want to make, though, is I think we are seeing, different pockets of climate policy emerge here. And particularly, I think we are still largely experiencing a pretty big shift in how Carney governs compared to how Trudeau governed in general. So it's not just on that climate policy piece, but there's been a significant focus here on the electricity grid, considering into where the path to economic competitiveness and lower emissions is coming in, investing in that clean power, transmission infrastructure, and electrification as sort of that more new, politically sustainable and perhaps supported form of climate policy. Mm-hmm. One of the things I did note lately, though, that there was a iPolitics report that talked about frustration with environmental organizations who are saying that not only are key climate policies getting rolled back, but also that they're not actually having much ability to talk to the Prime Minister's office and ministers about some of the policy solutions that could be undertaken as we set out a new industrial strategy, set out this new path with Trump, and feeling in general that there's, environmental voices just are not having as much influence or traction with the current Carney government as they did under Trudeau. So I think that in itself is how we look at policy shifts as well, and where that focus has been. So, big political balancing act. Certainly Carney is not the only elected official right now trying to balance it. I often hear, decision makers saying things like, well, when we're door knocking, for those that door knock, good on you. We don't hear from the public about climate. We don't hear it on the doorstep. This poll may suggest that that's going to be a shift in what people are thinking about, because it does impact their families' welfare and well-being. We do see people on massive evacuation orders across the country and really thinking about how climate change directly impacts them. But, for Carney, and we touched on this in previous shows as well, and especially last week talking about some of the changes in the Prime Minister's office, he's still really building this large coalition. It's got those moderate voters who are concerned about affordability. It's got progressive voters who park those votes and loan those votes to him for climate and environment reasons in particular. And then he's also still enticing conservatives over. So that's a pretty big tent to be trying to build, with divergent interests here about climate, but also, cost of living and economic challenges increasing and not really set as we see the impact of them on things like gas prices and food affordability. So it's going to be interesting to see if that room to maneuver for him continues to grow, or if it actually starts to shrink because the public's saying, get back to the job as we understand it on climate change. So, we might see those Angus Reid numbers as an early warning sign. Of course, Canadians are still deeply concerned about affordability and jobs and cost of living. It's what they feel every day in their lives. But they're also really increasingly being reminded that climate change isn't just a future problem. It's very much a current problem.
It's a now thing.
Yeah. So what about you, Tom? What are you tracking? Oh,
well, just if you don't mind, I think sometimes that people overestimated Carney's interest in the environment. Yeah. And in a way, the Conservatives sold that story because they wanted to create that story, because they wanted to just, you're an environmentalist and so you're bad. And so people heard that and went, oh, okay, he's an environmentalist. Plus, when he was doing his financing stuff, he was very much talking about trying to mobilize capital to help green industries. But that was in the context of Joe Biden and the CHIPS Act and trying to push money into green tech, green energy, and that made sense as a finance play, as an investment play. But, I mean, there's a difference between wanting to get into green tech because it's great ROI and just truly, in your heart, we gotta, we care about the planet. It's just a different thing. So I don't know. I honestly feel very uncertain about Mr. Carney where he fits in this on this issue.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
is
and
it
I think,
something
yeah.
in his heart, or is it just money?
Well, and I think it's interesting too because we had a couple of months ago, Shauna Sylvester joined us, right, talking about some of the strategies around things like creating heat pump industries, which has something I've been in rooms where the Prime Minister has talked about that as a strategy, but we're also seeing other jurisdictions jump into that kind of policy faster since the war in Iran impact. So, where we're seeing a little bit more of that push still on negotiating with Alberta on a pipeline, where is the then pushing into electrification or nature protection and some of the other policy that
Where's the drive? Where's the drive there?
Yeah, there's a lot of innovation around things like conservation finance and building out conservation economies. So I think those were also Trudeau era, hotspots, but maybe some space there for Carney to look at those financing options.
Or somebody else like, Avi Lewis to come in and say, well, this is the way we can mobilize capital to build green tech in Canada and to build green energy grid that Mr. Carney, we all know we need.
Yeah, he's leaving a lot of space at the end of the day.
Yeah, there's policy space.
Yeah.
I think it's good. Hopefully. Okay, now I want to tell you about what I was concerned about. We've had a big fight in Toronto over this island airport.
We have heard, yes.
Yes, you've heard a bit about it. Okay, it's been big news locally. I think it's been picked up a bit nationally.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of little threads about it that are pretty interesting, pretty detailed, and very much under the fold. So I connected with Chris Glover. He is the NDP MPP for the riding where this expansion was going to take place, and he did a great job, and he was really in the trenches for this fight. I caught up with him and gave him a quick interview to get his insights on, how did that community campaign take off, and how did it manage to overwhelm a very large lobbying effort from JP Morgan, the U.S. bank that owns the airport terminal, and was bankrolling the lobbyist effort. Chris, congratulations, and welcome to Left East to West.
Oh, thank you so much. But I got to say that congratulations may be a little bit early.
Well, you've called this a reprieve, not a win. But it is. I'm going to mark it as a victory, at least for the moment. And thank you for the job you did, very sincerely, as a Torontonian. I appreciate it. But I know it was a lot of people doing a lot of different things. On one side, we had the airport terminal owner, JP Morgan, the Ford PCs, and the Board of Trade. And on the other side, you, the Ontario NDP, City Council, and community groups. Were there key moments in this fight that you think really swung the debate?
I think the focus was like the way what we found out is that, through committee hearings and everything, that this was all planned ahead of time, that the federal government, JP Morgan, the Ford government and the Toronto Port Authority, the federal agency that managed the airport, they'd been meeting for months and months beforehand to plan this strategy. And then so Ford came out in front of it. And what we found out just this week is that Doug Ford and Mark Carney had a handshake secret deal that Carney would support the Billy Bishop Airport expansion in exchange for Ford supporting the Alto high-speed rail project.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
So I would say, as far as key moments go, I would say one of the key moments was changing the focus from Doug Ford to Ottawa, because airports are federally managed, and we took a busload of people and a bunch of other people drove up to Ottawa, and we lobbied all the Liberal MPs from Toronto. Heather McPherson, the NDP transport critic, asked a question of the federal minister of transport, and in his response at that time, this was back in May, in his response, he actually said that this project is moving forward. So that redoubled everybody's efforts. Like, everybody was galvanized, because literally this would have destroyed our waterfront.
Yeah. Okay, so JP Morgan had Ford and the PCs on side, and then, as you say, as we learned, Ford had a deal with Carney that he would lean on his Toronto MPs, all his Liberal MPs in Toronto, not to oppose this. Yes. The MPs said that they couldn't take a position until they'd seen a plan, but the Toronto Port Authority, a federal agency, had a plan. And we know this because they offered to show it to Mayor Chow if she signed an NDA about it. What? Like, this just seems so convoluted. Do you think JP Morgan's team just underestimated the public opposition, or overestimated their ability to silence everybody?
I think a bit of both. I think they did underestimate the opposition to this, because we've been through this fight twice in Toronto. David Miller became the mayor fighting a bridge over to the airport. And in 2015, again, the No Jets TO group managed to stop jets from landing at the airport. And so this is the third time that we're in this fight. People are ready for it. People knew we were a lot better prepared. So the No Jets TO, Norm DiPasquale, the leader of that group, he'd already been through this fight, and a whole team of people, that were supporting him. We had tons of information. I would say one of the big crucial moments was a month before Ford made his announcement, a 10-year-old Freedom of Information request for an environmental assessment on the impact of jets that had been conducted by the Toronto Port Authority was released to the Waterfront for All. And that environmental assessment, it showed that if you extend the runways, you're going to reduce the water flow through the harbor, and the concentration of pollution in the harbor is going to be much greater. It just all kinds of things. It talked about the health impacts of having jets landing or taking off every 2.5 minutes from the Billy Bishop Airport. So I would say the most crucial moment in this fight was that having that environmental assessment that was actually conducted by one of the proponents for the project, the Toronto Port Authority.
Yeah, Carney's announcement suspending federal support came under 48 hours before calling 3 by-elections, including one in Toronto, in the Toronto riding of Beaches, East York. On one hand, I think numbers would say it would be tough for the federal NDP to win that seat in current circumstances, but on the other, this whole episode really shows how much Toronto is badly served by having no independent NDP voices in the Commons. But also provincially, has this strengthened the Ontario NDP? And I've also noticed you've connected to other regional fights. Has that helped?
Oh, it's huge. I mean, it's the only way. If you crunch the numbers, they need $5 billion to expand this airport. We're already spending $3 billion at Pearson to expand it. So this is completely unnecessary. It's a complete waste of money. The only one that's going to benefit is JP Morgan. The ones that are going to lose is anybody who lives along or visits, attends events at the Toronto waterfront. The 28 million people every year who go to the Toronto waterfront, and it's Canada's #1 tourist destination. So, it's an absolutely ridiculous idea. And I think people are going to be rethinking it. Like that Carney made the announcement 2 days, that we're postponing the expansion 2 days before calling a by-election in Toronto in East York. Even in the Toronto Star, one of the Liberal insiders said, the timing was deliberate. They don't want to be debating the expansion of the Billy Bishop during this by-election in East York.
Yeah. Well, I think it's put some bounce into the step of the Ontario NDP. And I've noticed, even people from other MPPs from other corners of the province have sort of said, like, this just shows how weirdly Toronto-focused Ford is. And what about my region? Like, why aren't we getting double-laden highways? Why aren't we getting... So an interesting spin-offs.
Absolutely. I mean, you look at, like, Highway 11 was closed, and I'm not exactly certain of the days, but like 100 days, about 100 days last year. They had road closures on Highway 11, which is the Trans-Canada route, right? So they're not spending the money to twin that highway, but they're going to spend $5 billion to expand the Billy Bishop Airport, which nobody wants. And that $5 billion, that's $900 per household in Ontario. So people in Northern Ontario, their households are going to pay $900 of tax to expand an airport in downtown Toronto that the people in downtown Toronto do not want expanded.
Do not want, The only people who wanted it were in New York. But Chris, thanks for this insider view on that political fight, and thank you, very sincerely, thank you for being being part of this effort. I very deeply feel this would have been a huge step backwards for our city. We've reclaimed so much of the waterfront, so much better than it used to be when I was a kid, and this would have just been a huge step backwards. So thank you very much.
To the listeners, come down to the Toronto waterfront, walk along the waterfront, grab a beer, take a ferry over to the islands, go to Bill de Salgues Park. They just added another addition to Bill de Salgues Park. It is honestly the best children's park I've ever been to. They've got, zip lines. They've got not just sand pits. They've got water running through the sand pits, so you have mud pits, which is even more fun than just sand. So, if you've got kids in your life, take your kids out to Bilbisage Park and enjoy the waterfront.
Good advice. Okay. Thank you, Chris. And we're going to take a quick break, and Nikki and I will be right back with Jared Walker.
Thanks so much, Tom.
Okay.
Jared Walker, thanks for joining us on Left East to West. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. So we want to dive right in. You're fairly new as Executive Director of Canadians for Tax Fairness. You're taking it in some interesting directions and making media impact. But you have a long history yourself already working on progressive policies and movements that you're bringing into the role, which I'm sure is bringing great expertise into the organization as you build out. Let's talk a little bit about some of your recent activities through Tax Fairness released a report on extreme wealth inequality in Canada from east to west, so fitting for our show, that was covered in most of the major media. So kudos to you on that feat. Can you tell us a little bit about where we're at on tax policy and the direction that you think that we're heading into in Canada?
Yeah, Nikki. So this report kind of came out of an experience that I've had. I know probably you and Tom have had working on a bunch of provincial campaigns in particular across the country. And usually we on the left propose a nice thing, and then reflexively, whether or not anybody actually cares or believes in the thing, the first question that is asked is, how are you going to pay for that? Maybe we make some noises about the wealthy paying their fair share, but really we don't have, frankly, we don't have the information about who living where would pay what in many of these cases. We kind of write it on the back of a napkin, slap it in the in our platform, and hope that the numbers all add up, and then that's pretty much the end of it.
Yeah.
And when I came to this position, this was one of the things that I was like, okay, well, let's see if we can fill in the data here, right? Because we already nationally don't have great data on where wealthy people live, on what it would look like to tax them. So the folks at BC Policy Solutions and our team did some work on a federal wealth tax, what that would look like. And then I asked Silas Schwerab, our economist, if we could dig into that stuff provincially, and this is what came of that. So now we can say, in every province, this is where our 86 billionaire families live, give or take. This is where folks with $100 million or more in wealth live. This is where folks with $10 million or more in wealth live. And this is what poverty looks like, broad strokes, in every province. And then based on that, we sort of charted out a bunch of different wealth taxes, both annual wealth taxes and then a one-time smash and grab to be able to pay for some things that we would like to pay for. So that the next time there is a provincial election, and somebody gets asked that question on the left, they can just point to the work we've done, and that's the end of that, right? And so the folks at Quebec Solidaire, we've been in contact with them. They've already sort of proposed their own wealth tax, and we're talking to folks in opposition and in government across the country to just say, hey, look, this is something that you can avail yourself of, and these are some of the things that we can pay for with this money if we basically. What amounts to a rounding error for somebody who's worth $100 million, worth $1 billion, and this is how much healthcare you can buy. This is how many schools you can fix, right? And so that's what this report does.
That's great. And then given looking at deficits across the country and progressive governments trying to figure out solutions instead of cutbacks, I'm sure you're getting some good traction there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's the piece of this, right? Is that there's just this constant refrain that's part of our neoliberal kind of ongoing situation that we can't pay for the things that we need, and so we have to sell them off or cut the services, and that's not true. What has happened is that a small group of people have basically decided that they don't want to be part of the social contract anymore, and they don't want to pay for things. And they have insulated themselves from those costs, and we've got to get that money back.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even last week, the idea of who should get voting, who should be allowed to vote, starts to come into the picture. That's kind of peculiar. You're also advocating not just on a wealth tax, but also a new tax bracket for incomes over $1 million a year. And in a way, I think this is kind of a back to the future. Like back in the 50s and the 60s, the highest tax, well, I think the highest tax bracket, I don't know where it started, but the rate was above 90% in the United States and in the UK, a little lower here. But that all kind of went away with Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. How do you bring it back, though?
Yeah, I mean, like that's part of the reason why we have advocated a wealth tax as well as part of this sort of thing. Linda McCaig's new book is sort of digs into this, right, and how this all happened. But basically, we used to have the whole point of income tax post the Gilded Age was to guard against obscene salaries. People, right, like against the robber barons, to pull that back. And for a while, income tax worked, right? It was the means by which we made sure that people didn't pay themselves, say, $200 million a year, like Tobias Luka, who doesn't think your granny should be able to vote. Like, those to stop against those worst excesses. But in the past 50 years, since, Reagan, Mulroney, Thatcher, the whole set of them, these corporate tax rates have gone down, income tax has not kept pace with the times, and there's been all these carve-outs, and so we're trying to say, well, actually the top income tax bracket is not that much money. I mean, like, unfortunately these days, right? Like it used to be, you make a 6-figure salary and that you can buy a house and take care of a family and all those things now, and like the 6-figure salary, maybe you can pay rent in Toronto if you're lucky, but we're basically looking at the tax system right now, whether it's income tax, whether it's capital gains, whether it is the wealth taxes, and saying, look, how do we readjust this so that we can return to a system where that we set up after we realize that it turns out like 1 or 2% of the people should not have the vast majority of the resources and the political power, right? Like, how do we not do feudalism again, basically?
Yeah. Which I'm sure is getting higher and on public line of sight right now, too, in the last couple of years, at least for sure. So let's pivot a little bit. So you've also been talking about our tax system as part of policy machinery to create jobs and industries. So, and I think really timely right now with Trump rearing his head again on trade policy, but talking about protecting our sovereignty from Trump's attacks as well. How can tax policy support industrial strategies that are aimed at jobs and sovereignty?
Yeah. So, I mean, starting back when the Carney government was definitely going to pass the DST, and then like immediately rolled over on it.
The digital sales tax.
Yeah, the digital sales tax, which is basically saying, hey, Meta, Google, Netflix, these companies make billions of dollars here in Canada because of the way that they do their books. They book all that profit offshore, so they don't pay tax on it here. Right. How can we make sure that they pay something? And Trump and his billionaire buds got really mad about that. Mark Carney gave it away without getting anything in return. And so together with a number of other civil society groups, people like, Adrian Clarkson and John Ralston and the folks at Torstar, like really a Unifor, like a broad cross-section of groups. We got together, started this thing called Canadians for Digital Sovereignty, which was like basically how do we make sure across the board, not just on digital sales tax, but on all of these sorts of things, that Canada actually has some say over the economy of the future, right? And when we look at that, or when we look at the economy that we have now, for example, when we look at our oil and gas economy, We did some research last year that showed that the Canada's Big Four are about 75% foreign owned, 60% owned by American shareholders. So even our biggest industry that we're supposed to build up to be able to hold on to our sovereignty, we don't own the profits that come from that. And those companies are not investing in Canadian communities. They're extracting profits and then sending that money to Texas, right? So when we look at tax policy and economic policy in general, we've got to look at where these flows are going and hedge against things that are not working the way that we like, and build a new economy that works differently. Whether that is on the digital front, whether that is like where we invest, whether that is in making sure that we still own our airports, which is maybe something we'll get to later. It's sort of tragic because you have a government that was elected basically by saying we will not become the 51st state, and their entire industrial policy is basically to make us in de facto the 51st state, which seems to me to be a problem. I don't know.
Canadians for Taxpayers has also been talking a lot about high fuel costs, how it damages our economic growth, while the oil companies are making off like bandits during this Iran war situation. Is there precedent for the kind of windfall tax you guys are advocating? And how could that revenue from a windfall tax actually help make life more affordable for the people who are paying these exorbitant fuel prices to these, gas station bandits?
Yeah, I mean, so right now, the projections keep fluctuating because the strait is open, then it's not, then it's open, then it's not. But the estimate is that big oil is going to make about $90 billion in windfall profits from this particular crisis. For all our normies out there, windfall profits are extra surprise crisis profits, right? It's like they're already going to make a certain amount of profits. They did not see this coming, and they are going to make $90 billion in extra money they did not plan for because of the cost of gas, right? And so what we're saying is if we put a tax on that, we can claw that money back. We can and you can call it whatever you like, call it a Canada Strong dividend, I don't care, pay people back for what they paid at the pump, right? And then we can take some of the rest of that money and we can invest it into renewables so that the next time something like this happens, we are a little more insulated. And other countries have done this. Like, for example, the Chinese, in a different way, have invested a lot of money in renewables to try and insulate themselves more or less from this, especially moving forward. But in terms of windfall taxes, we had one after World War II that was in the 70s. The English have one right now. The UK has a windfall tax as well. And so these sorts of taxes, they're not novel. We've done them before when we have realized, oh gosh, we need to hedge against the worst impulses of these companies, particularly in parts of the economy where they have monopolistic or oligopolistic or cartel control over an industry. And it's a thing that's good for everybody, that keeps prices down, that puts money back in people's pockets. And so it's something also, we did some polling on this, that has the support of 2/3 of Canadians. Even, I was looking at the crosstabs, even in Alberta, this has a majority of support. So it's something we all can agree on.
Yeah, and then building on that too, because you've got some interesting work done in-house on Canada Oil Resources and revenue, and so seeing, and I noted this a little bit, but how Canada is increasingly flowing to foreign investors, the revenue from oil production, not Canadian paychecks. So can you expand a bit on what that trend looks like for those who aren't familiar with it?
Yeah, so in the last oil and gas boom, basically, and in the one preceding that, we had all of these companies come into the oil sands. They invested a lot of money to set up infrastructure, and that's all the jobs that you hear the advocates crowing about, right? All these
Right.
jobs to build things, all these jobs to get people to set up the pipelines, to build the infrastructure, to man the infrastructure. And what we found is that regardless of the fact that they keep like brandishing these particular jobs as a positive for the industry, what we've seen since then is that every year they employ less people, right? Because this is what companies do, right? They are trying to find efficiencies. They're figuring out how to work these resources, work the this infrastructure with less labor. So they hire less people. They pay people less. They contract out more. And then on top of that, they are not building new projects, right? So regardless of whether or not you think new projects are a good thing, if you do, the oil and gas industry is not interested in investing in building new projects. And so kind of what we have right now with the Carney government and with the Smith government in Alberta is these guys coming along behind and putting public money into projects that the oil companies had no interest in building because they did not think they would be profitable, right? So we're gonna do all of the legwork in order for these companies, as I said before, which are majority American owned, to then reap all of the benefits. As I said before, not pay workers more, and then send that money to the U.S. So that's sort of the situation that we're in. They set up shop, and initially they outlay some capital, they outlay some labor costs, but then the trend line goes all the way down.
Right. Yeah, sure. They built the infrastructure. That took a lot of manpower, but then to run it, obviously a lot less.
Exactly.
But also you're tracking something about the payroll's gone down. Okay, we can see that. But the profits have gone up, and a lot of that profit is flowing out of the country, even though kind of the spin is the oil sands are making us super wealthy, but a lot of that wealth is really not going to Canada, staying in Canada. So did you do some work? You did some work on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So, I mean, the piece about who this wealth is going to, as I said, we basically, when I say 60% American owned, what I mean is that the shareholders that these dividends are going to are located in the U.S. Right. And in terms of the balance of, well, we're making more money off of these things. I think like what it's important for people to understand is both in this crisis where gas prices have gone up and therefore oil company profits have gone up, and the last time this happened, which was when the Russians invaded Ukraine and oil prices spiked. What happens is these companies are then able to charge more for oil that it costs them no more to extract, because obviously oil supply is not under threat here in Canada, as far as I know. And then that cost gets passed on to the consumer, and then the cost of that gets then flowed to shareholders because, as I said, they are not reinvesting, they are not paying more in labor costs, and they are paying more in dividends and in buybacks and in these sorts of tools that basically allow them to take these profits and give them to the folks who invested. And when it comes to this particular crisis, they have even said publicly that is what they intend to do with this money, right? That they do not intend to reinvest it, that they do not intend to build more infrastructure, that they do not intend to hire more Canadian workers. They do intend to further enrich their shareholders. And so that's what happens. And so basically we as consumers finance this wealth transfer from our pockets to the pockets of a very small group of people, mostly in the United States. I was thinking about a new way of kind of getting into this because of some new news that just came out about the World Cup. So I don't know if you folks, I can tell I'm a football fan. But for folks listening, I am wearing a Jamaica football jersey right now. But basically the FIFA World Cup and Gianni Infantino, Trump's bud, who runs it, had this plan that they wanted to segment off the World Cup, the Women's World Cup, the Men's World Cup, the Club World Cup, as a private entity to basically privatize the World Cup, and they were going to bribe all the member countries with $20 million to vote yes so that they could push it through. And who was going to finance this? Jared Kushner.
Oh, nice.
Right? So, but in the space of literally a day, the European countries all got together, UEFA, they held an emergency meeting and they said, absolutely not. We're not going to do this. Then CONCACAF, which is the North American and Central American countries, they all got together. They said no. They're all going to boycott the World Cup if this happens, right? And the feeling that everybody who loves this sport felt in the pit of their stomach when they were like, oh, we're going to take the World Cup and we're going to sell it to private equity, that is the feeling everyone should have every time the government says, oh, we've got this great idea. We're going to take Pearson and we're going to sell it to a foreign company, right? It's the same thing. It's the same neoliberal playbook every time. The asset is underperforming. What do we need? Capital infusion. What happens? We all pay more for fees because now we've created a monopoly that we don't control. And then that monopoly can charge whatever it wants. And then whoever has to pay those fees passes them on to us. And then we get worse service that we pay more for all of time. And who gets the benefit? Like a few dozen tech bros or a few dozen hedge fund bros who are already fabulously wealthy, right? And so that's what we're seeing the Carney government considering when it comes to airports. And that's what we've seen in healthcare privatization and bits and bobs in different provinces all across the country. And it's what we've seen to catastrophic effect all over the place, for example, in the US, like when it comes to prison privatization, or God forbid, ICE detention privatization, or all of these terrible things where private equity owns things that no one should own, and then squeezes them as an asset for profit, as if it were like a freaking smoothie shop.
Well, thanks so much for joining us today. I wish we had tons of time to dig into this, but we do actually, before we go, want to hear a bit about what you're working on right now that we might see soon from Canadians for Tax Fairness.
Yeah, I mean, well, first I would say, you can follow us on social, particularly at Canadians for the number 4 Tax Fairness, or go to taxfairness.ca if you want to follow our work and support. We're going to be digging a little bit more into this sort of subnational stuff, so the provincial stuff. Particularly, we are trying to round out our suite of policy offerings to say, okay, if we're going to build a new tax policy from the ground up, what does it look like? So we talked about income tax and changing that to make it make more sense in 2026. We talked about a wealth tax and asking particularly people with $100 million in the bank or billionaires to pay slightly more, basically a rounding error, so we can, have healthcare and hospitals and things that we need to function. One other thing that we're looking at right now is our inheritance tax situation, because Canada is the only country in the G8 or G7 that does not have an inheritance tax.
Right.
So, for example, the Thompson family, they're the wealthiest. They're the wealthiest family in Canada now. They were the wealthiest family in Canada in 1999. They were the wealthiest family in Canada in 1979. How does that happen? It's because when one of these guys dies, and it's always a guy, when one of these old guys dies, all their kids inherit their money, it's not taxed, and then that money grows, right? By the magic of compound interest and by the magic of investment. And when we look at what we could do differently, if we had what I'm calling a Nepo baby tax, because I want to be clear
Nice.
that this is not for all our family members. They, you worked hard, you bought a house, and you want to leave it to your kids.
Yeah.
This is not you we're talking about.
Not your average voter. Yeah.
Not your average voter. We're talking about people who are millionaires hundreds of times over, right?
Yeah.
And so if we look at how this might work, South Korea is a great example. They have an inheritance tax, and their wealthy people are at least seemingly happy to pay for it because their culture has this thing called shame, right? So in Korea, the Samsung family just paid off an $8 billion inheritance tax bill because the Samsung patriarch just died. And that's $8 billion US, right? Wow. So with that much money, just from one family, from one patriarch passing along, that's enough money to run the Seoul Metro, which is one of the biggest metro systems in the world, for the next 5 years. Right? Just to give people a sense of what is this, how much money is that, right?
Cover off a provincial deficit in there.
Exactly, right? And so it's if we looked at, when the next Thompson, the next Weston, the next Schulich, any of these rich families, when the next patriarch passes, we actually tax that wealth accordingly. We tax that inheritance accordingly. What we could do with this to be able to pay for things that we all need. So an inheritance tax is another piece. And then we're doing one piece that I actually think we might be able to get done from a political standpoint federally, because the field is a little fallow with this government right now, which is something called PCBCR, which I hate, so I just call it corporate tax transparency because we don't need another acronym. But what PCBCR stands for is public country-by-country reporting, right? They have it in Australia, they have it in the EU. It's basically, if you are a big multinational corporation, you have to publicly put on the internet where you book your revenue, where you book your profits, so that people know, for example, if you are Meta and you made X billion dollars in Canada, but you then bought the services from yourself from a multinational in Bermuda, we know that, so that then we can all act accordingly, right? The CRA has this information, but they don't tell us the information, and the government does not particularly act on it. So what we've seen in countries, like particularly in Australia, where they do have this, is it has made really significant changes to the ways that corporations act. And it has actually really created some interesting incentives. So like in Australia, the banking industry right now is at the tech industry's throats, because the banking industry now knows how much more tax they pay than the tech industry, because they can't leave, right?
Be a real shame to see the bankers and the tech bros go at it.
Right? And so, but what this
Kind of
means
like that would
is
be the greatest fight of all time.
It's great, though, because what it means is the banking industry now is putting that money behind a push, both on the lobbying side, on the public side, to make sure that the government is in a place where they make tech companies pay their taxes too. Right?
Interesting.
And so you have these weird allies in this space. Like, wouldn't it be great if we had, a progressive government that had the backing of TD and CIBC in making sure that that Google and Amazon paid more tax? Like, what a world that would be. We might actually be able to get some stuff done. So that's the last piece that we're looking at. We're working with the folks in Australia and with multiple opposition parties. We've talked to folks obviously in the NDP. We've talked to folks in the Bloc that are interested in this as well, and even some of the Tories have intimated that they would pass this, to put something on Carney's face. So we're hoping in the next Parliament to get some legislation on the floor to see if we can get this passed.
Okay, that sounds really interesting. So maybe a bill.
Maybe a bill.
We'll call it. It's not going to be. So it would be like a transparency bill.
Yes,
a corporate profit shifting transparency kind of idea.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
and
Jared, thank you.
Can't
Comes back to that shame thing, doesn't it?
Yeah,
we're getting pretty shameless here in Canada too. It seems.
Bring back shame.
Yeah, bring back. A little bit of it is a healthy thing. I think. I don't know. Thank you for joining us and sharing all your insights. And you've told us how we can keep up with your with your news bulletins. But just also to mention, you're obviously not a corporate backed group. You do rely on donations so you can keep making an impact, right? So, people might want to keep that in mind if your kind of policy agenda is going to continue to have an impact. People have to pony up and help out a little bit. So
thank you, Tom, for flagging that. My team
that's kind of important.
If I got to the end of the call and I didn't do that, taxfairness.ca/donate is how you can donate. Even $5 a month makes a big difference. And it helps to pay for this research and for us to talk to folks and particularly to talk to everyday people about the economy that they know is rigged against them and what they can do to make it better.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Jared. We're going to take a quick
Thanks for
break,
joining
and
us.
we're going to be right back with Love It or Heave It. Before we wrap up, we've come to that part of the show we call Love It or Heave It, about something you love and want to keep, or something you'd like to heave and forever forget. What are you doing this week, Nikki?
Well, I'm not sure if it's a love. I feel like I'm constantly saying that. Do I love it or heave it? But it is something that caught my eye. And I think, a lot of the theme maybe on today's show also is affordability and public spending. This is probably why it caught my eye, in addition to the Team Canada approach. So, we do know affordability pressures are continuing to impact Canadians, but there's also scrutiny associated with that. We talked with Merit Stiles last week about Doug Ford's scandals on this, how public dollars are being spent. So in Saskatchewan, the spotlight has turned over to Premier Scott Moe because he used taxpayer-funded travel to head down to Washington, D.C. for the funeral of former U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham. And so Moe has been taking some heat, not just from the opposition party, the NDP, but also in the media and from the public, about spending money to do it. And he's been defending the trip, really digging in on Graham having been a longtime friend of Saskatchewan, who had ties with provincial leaders, supported discussions for them around trade, energy security, carbon capture, visited apparently in 2015. So I think, where the question comes in here from Saskatchewan's NDP and critics is whether public funds, therefore, should have been used for the visit. And they're calling on the government to disclose the full cost and arguing that because Graham was a close ally of U.S. President Donald Trump, and we're, of course, seeing whose policies have been very damaging to Canada, that attending in his capacity as premier and using some of those dollars is a challenge to our relationship and our Team Canada approach as well. So on the flip side, the Moe government is maintaining that because he attended as premier and was using the trip to advance Saskatchewan's interests and talking through Canada-U.S. trade relations, which are, of course, hot right now, that he also tied in meetings with Canadian and American officials. So I think, as Canada heads into another likely turbulent period in our relationship with the United States, as if we haven't been turbulent all along, alongside debates on Western alienation and Alberta's referendum discussions coming up here, we can probably see political leaders having a lot more heightened scrutiny, not only about how they're spending public money that's not going into affordability measures, but also, where they're showing up and who they're choosing to stand beside right now.
Yeah. You saw that Tim Houston also got nailed for expenses flying to London, staying at a posh hotel, and so this
it's not the right time, I think, for decision makers to understand, right?
Yeah, that people don't want to see that. They want to see people who are frugal.
Yeah,
and
it's funny,
I
got a text a few weeks ago from someone saying, I can't remember, they were not of our political stripe, and they were flying somewhere and they saw Premier David Hubie, and it was like a small flight, and the Premier was sitting in economy in a middle seat, and he was like, that's a smart politician right now. And I'm like, of course, anyone knows he's a very tall guy. So sitting in economy in the middle is there's where you get your public credit right now.
Yeah, well, somebody should. There was that kind of famous video of Bernie having a good sleep in the middle seat. Row 27D, or I guess, Anyway, that's interesting.
How about you, Tom? What's on your mind this week?
Well, I am loving that the people of Toronto stopped this really bad plan from JP Morgan to turn the Island Airport into a major international airport. I lived in the city most of my life, and for decades there has been slow but good work on rejuvenating an industrial and rail yard waterfront into a people place. And I am just loving that, at least for now, that good work over many years is not going to be undone. So I'm really pleased about that. I do love my city, and my children are in this city, and I want it to be a good city for them and for everybody else. I am also loving how dumb the PR from JP Morgan was. So their big pitch was that the project was going to be good for the economy, but when people said, okay, let's see the business case, we were told there wasn't one. So what backed up the claim? Does JP Morgan do their asset funds regularly buy up lobbyists and make multi-billion-dollar investments without a plan. Like, it just didn't seem honest or credible. And even as federal Liberal MPs said they couldn't weigh in with a position because there was no plan, the Federal Port Authority offered to show this non-existent plan to Mayor Chow if she signed an NDA and kept the existence of it secret from voters. I cannot understand.
In a pre-election period, smart.
I cannot understand how JP Morgan lobbyists thought Chow was going to do that. Instead, she did the complete opposite. She revealed there was a plan and that it was being withheld from her, and only was going to be released to her if she withheld it and basically became a liar in public. No, she's not going to do that. Like, gosh. Suddenly, if federal Liberal MPs couldn't take a position because they hadn't seen a plan, that wasn't because Doug Ford was hiding it from them. It was because their own federal agency was hiding it from them. And then neither Prime Minister Carney or his transport minister did anything to make this mysterious report public. So it's just like turned into big PR chaos when everybody didn't, just obey what JP Morgan said. Like, we have Chris Glover on here. We talked to Marge Stiles about it last week. Olivia Chow. I mean, they weren't just going to click their heels like the other guys. So I love that. That's good. And I love that it reminds people, I think here in Toronto, reminds people that we do need NDP MPs in the House of Commons. We used to have Jack. We used to have Olivia. We used to have Peggy Nash as MPs from the city. They would be in opposition to the Liberal majority in a way the Conservatives never would. We need that. We need that back. But we're still a long way from that, unfortunately. But I think from the reaction of Liberal MPs about this whole Toronto Island event, the potential, for regrowing and re-electing or electing new Democrat MPs for the city to be a real different kind of opposition to the Liberal majority, it's got its place. It has its need. And now, if you have a need, the votes will come.
Is this where we get to do a little shout out to Shannon Devine running in the by-election coming up as well? There's an opportunity.
Absolutely. Yeah, Beaches East York is a Toronto waterfront riding. It's Shannon is the executive director of the Toronto District Labour Council. She's been involved in the labour movement a lot over many years. Very talented, very hardworking person. So obviously the NDP did not do well in 2025 in that riding. It's like 7 or 8%. But I think she's going to boost that number a lot. And you know what? Maybe people will figure we do need a Shannon Devine, or at least somebody, some new Democrat to be in Ottawa, because having, the red wall of silence on Billy Bishop was a very bad thing for the city. We need to have opposition voices, new Democrat opposition voices, and Shannon should be, obviously, she's the one who volunteered to do that job. So get out there and vote for her and help her.
Well, I mean, as everyone knows, we don't send tons of love to Toronto from BC, but we send lots over. Nor does the rest of the country. But we send lots of good wishes over to Shannon and the other by-election candidates, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, in future episodes.
Okay. Well, you've heard from Nikki and me. You can email us at lefteastowest@gmail.com. You can tell us about what you're loving or heaving. And also, please tap the follow button on your podcast player to get reminders about our upcoming interviews. Break week next week, but the week after that, we're with B. Bruss, the president of the Canadian Labour Congress. So lots of interesting topics to talk about right now, especially as we may have WestJet employees walk off the job or be locked out, and then the government use Section 107, and that huge debate coming back. So we'll see what happens.
Stay tuned.
Right.
Okay. Have a great break.
Have a great week. Oh, great 2 weeks. Take care, Nikki.
Thanks for joining Left East to West with hosts Nikki Hill and Tom Parkin. We'd love to hear your comments, ratings, follows, and shares. It helps people find us. To become a Left East to West community member and to help us reach even more Canadians, subscribe using the link in the show notes. You can watch us on YouTube or listen wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Just search for Left East to West and subscribe. I'm Doug Hamilton signing off for Left East to West. We'll see you next week.